Up next on Inside the SCCA, Mid-Ohio Super Tour Preview. Our guest tonight is none other than Marc Cefalo. Thank you for joining us. Appreciate that. And let me make sure, everything looks like it's supposed to look here. I had a missing button after all of that. Marc and I were having such a great conversation leading into the show that I forgot to press a button. So welcome to the show, Marc. How you doing?
Doing great. Thanks for having me.
I appreciate having you on the show as well. Mike Collins is already in the chat. He says he's got his PBR and popcorn in hand. I think you've got some stuff coming at you once the chatters start asking questions.
I'm sure. I'll have to tell Mike that he's got to upgrade from PBR.
Yeah, definitely. When I was a kid, it was Schlitz. What we drank, and what was one Schmidt beer in Minnesota when I went to college. So I know all about that good stuff. So we start the show the same way for first-time guests. So here it comes. How did you get mixed up in this crazy sport that we love?
Interesting. It really started with Solo 2, with autocrossing. That's how I found out about the SCCA. Came across an event locally to me. In a large parking lot, saw individual cars, going through the course, checked it out, saw what it was all about. Always have been into cars, and it seemed really easy where people were taking their street cars, beating on them, if you will, in a controlled environment, and started from there with my street car. Eventually broke that. Many people... at the time, this is about mid-late 90s, the first generation RX-7 was kind of popular to the group. Many suggested, getting one of those would be a little bit, lesser expensive than what I was driving, easier to fix, pretty reliable. And that's when the snowball effect started, where getting the car, modifying it, progressing, and then also was big in our area was hill climbing.
Okay.
So autocrossing, it moved to Solo 1 of hill climbing and Solo 1 events at tracks, basically your current version of like a time attack.
Right.
And with that came increased safety standards, seat belts, roll cages. Sure. And then the next step was a couple of DE events, lapping days, being on track. And I remember it to this day, an event at Pocono on their infield. The drive home literally felt, this is it. This is what it's all about. This is what I want to do. And then progressed from first generation RX-7s to the second gen. My father and I I got him involved in racing and went that way, not the other way around.
Yeah.
And the bug bit him pretty hard. And before you knew it, both of us had matching ITS RX-7s.
Okay. Continued
down that road. And in the early 2000s, 2001, 2002, built our first spec Miatas. And kind of the rest is history. We continued on evolving down that path. Planet Miata started in 2005, initially as a side project to pay for racing, and then it turned into a full-fledged business. We had a big problem. We did a little bit of advertising, had a basic website, and the phone started ringing. That was the problem.
Yeah.
And almost 20 years later, here we are. So that's the super simplified lineage of,
right,
how I got to where we are now.
So there's some common themes in the answer to that question. And the most common one is my family's been in racing since I was, before I could walk, and I was kind of bored into it. Autocross, though, is another really common, kind of the second route I hear most. When you stumbled across the autocross, did you drive past an event that was happening? How did you stumble across it?
Pretty much, yeah.
Okay.
It was already happening. It's not like I found out about it beforehand.
Right.
Saw it happening and checked it out and went from there.
Right. Now, I'm not going to presume that you're as old as I am, but back when I started, there was no internet. There were no message boards. There was no
True.
instant message.
Yep.
When I went to the racetrack with my family and I told my friends, I'm going to the racetrack, they had no idea what I was talking about. They probably thought it was the quarter-mile dirt track like we had a half mile from our house. There was no the video cameras back then were the size of a lunchbox, so you really couldn't mount them in a car. And even if you could, they'd be so jiggly that you couldn't get any good pictures out of it. Now we've got the YouTube, as I like to call it. We've got the internet. We've got all these places to learn about how to do things. You can do a Google search for how to have fun with car. I mean, there's so much stuff out there that makes it easier to find us. But it still seems like people have a hard time finding us. How is that?
There's a lot of. I think the easiest way is there's a lot of competition to grab people's attention.
Yeah.
Our attention spans are shorter and shorter. We're constantly on our phones.
Yeah.
The easiest way to simplify it is someone's cell phone is their remote control to life.
Right.
And if you're not getting in front of their face on their phone, you're missing out.
Right.
So it's easier to get information out to people and to publicize events and what you're all about and so on and so forth. There's that much more competition to get everybody's interest and attention.
Right.
It's easier said than done.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people that are involved in motorsports, but there's still new people coming into SCCA that, wish they found it earlier.
Right. One of the things we have going for us now, and I don't want the whole podcast to go down this road. There's a lot of other stuff I want to talk about with you. Is we've got a great opportunity here with iRacing. There's a Spec Racer 4, there's a Formula V, there's Formula Fords, there's the Spec Miata. All of these SCCA cars that would race and can race and do race in the SCCA, are on iRacing. And we've already got a target audience of people who are interested in doing this kind of stuff. So I hope that we do a better job of getting involved with that and using that as a tool to get people interested. So, all right, so you got involved with Spec Miata. Were you right on the ground floor of Spec Miata, or were you a few years past? Because I'm doing the math, 20 years ago, that's 2004. That's still pretty deep into when Spec Miata was a thing, right?
Yeah, Spec Miata probably started dribbling around some areas of Texas and the New England states in late 90s, 99, 2000, right, where, guys and gals with old Showroom Stock C cars were finding a home for them. So we were a few years behind. I want to say it was either 2001 or 2002 that we built our first 1.6 cars. So
right.
A couple, there were a couple people starting off. It was interesting. I remember being at Lime Rock Park at regionals where they weren't really a formally recognized class.
Right.
They would go out in whatever run group it would be, let's say, 5 or 6 of them. They would do their own rolling start at the back of the pack. And it was that little snowball effect. They grew organically. And to the point where 2006, the class was nationally recognized.
Right.
And then it really took off.
Right.
When it had a formal home in the GCR with its rule set and a championship race at the end of the year. And now it's still, the strongest and most popular amateur-based road racing class in the country.
Right. How responsible is Mazda for that?
Mazda has a huge part of it.
Yeah.
Mostly with the parts program, the motorsports program. From personal experience, I've tried and dabbled with other makes and models. Some Acuras, did a little bit of Showroom Stock racing with Acuras, a brief stint with an S2000. And when it comes to technical advice, information, parts supplies, there's nothing better than the Mazda brand in the United States. Every other manufacturer is that much more difficult to deal with. So Mazda has there's a big chunk there, responsible for the growth of the class.
Right.
Without them, it wouldn't be at the level it is this quick.
Right. Right. Mike Collins is in the chat talking about him and Jim Daniels. They were they were really instrumental in getting the whole thing going. And back in the day, I remember I was probably at Lime Rock in those years with you as well as a flagger at that point in time. And I remember Spec Miata started out as just a couple of guys showing up, and then it grew momentum from there, like a lot of things in the club. And now on most race weekends, Spec Miata and Spec Racer Ford are the two highest subscribed race groups every weekend at the racetrack. When did Planet Miata come out of this?
So technically, Planet Miata began in March of 2005. So we use that month and date. That's when the business license started.
Mm.
The thought process began 4 to 6 months prior, and it came about again to help pay for racing. It turned into a full-fledged business, and obviously Spec Miata is part of it. It's not everything.
Sure.
We deal in everything Mazda, Miata, and MX-5 related, from the first gens all the way up to the current ND chassis. We have customers that do Spec Miata, improved touring. We support some people that are in production cars, super touring cars, Spec MX-5. We maintain some cars, some Global MX-5 Cup cars. And then there's the track day crowd. There's the street crowd. We have people that have the Sunday drivers that drop off their cars for repairs, maintenance, what have you. But it's still very, very, very specialized. A Miata or MX-5, that's all we touch. We don't work on it.
There's been other manufacturers who've popped into the sport and been here for a hot minute. Dodge was big with Neon for a while. HPD was in and out, but the only one that really seems to have stuck around for the long haul has been Mazda, and with the MX-5s or with the Miatas, and now into the MX-5s and stuff like that. So what does a typical race weekend look like for you? Because I know now you're pretty much focusing on Touring 4 from the driving side, right? But you've got all this other stuff going on. What does a typical race weekend look like for you?
While I do concentrate on Touring 4 at the Super Tour level, I still dabble a little bit in Spec MX or Spec Miata at the majors and regional level. But a race weekend, on average, we can do 2 to 3 weekends a month. We'll take care of as little as 2 to 3 customers, as many as 5 to 6. I try to cap it at 6. You start getting above that number, and it's easy for things to kind of get sideways in terms of taking care of the cars and customers and what have you. And I joke around with the fellow shop owners that for a race weekend, we're at the track. We're not so much race shops, we're more moving companies, because we're taking all of our stuff and the customers, and we're moving it all over the country to all these different tracks.
Right.
But typical week leading up to an event, like for Mid-Ohio for us, we try to plan well ahead. We have 2 weekends off, so the trucks and trailers are actually ready, cars are ready. A few days prior to us leaving, while the trailers are loaded, the last bit is just the cars to get in there. So we try to plan well ahead, figure out the best times for load in. You're always worrying about traffic and weather and so forth. Getting there on time, getting the right paddock spot, getting unloaded, getting set up, and being ready for that first session, whether it's qualifying or the test day, is as soon as the cars fire up, they need to be able to hit the track running.
Back at the shop, how much of your work is prep work on cars for race weekends, and how much of your work is servicing customers through all of the stuff that you sell to support Miata's racing somewhere?
Easiest way to answer that is it's about a third. So a third is streetcar related.
Okay.
A third being the parts aspect of the business, new and used parts sales, disassembling parts cars and so forth. The last third being motorsports related stuff, track day cars, race cars, and that pendulum swings a little bit depending on what events are coming up and also the time of year. But that's the easiest way to kind of explain how things are split up.
Right, right. Supposed to ask you about the Centurion.
The what?
The Centurion? Mike Collins says, I miss the old locals logo Centurion.
Oh, okay. The it was a cartoon character. It was an anime. Yeah, that used to be on an old trailer of ours.
Okay.
We probably still have in some print media. It was a Japanese anime cartoon character. I forget the name of it.
Okay.
That we tweaked a little bit, and guy gave the two-finger peace sign.
Right, right.
It was really big on one of our old trailers.
Got it.
I forget, and a lot of people, remember it.
Very cool. Very cool. What's the when you've done Miatas for so long, what is the most important thing to do week in and week out, to get your Miata on the track, to keep it close as possible to pointy end of the stick? What is the thing that after every race weekend you guys are coming back and taking care of?
When you come back and the car comes off the trailer, it's the set down. Comes off the trailer, seeing what's changed, what's moved, and post prep. When the cars are offloaded, regardless of whether that car is going out the very next weekend or it's going to stay idle for 4 weeks, 6 weeks, what have you, immediately comes off the trailer, has to be cleaned, has to get into the shop and post prepped, and gone over, inspected, nut and bolted, going through the fluids, checking, for example, the magnets on the transmission, the differential. It's not like the cars are fragile, so to speak. You're trying to catch that one issue
right.
that might be arising or has arisen. So you catch it at the shop and you're not dealing with it at the track.
Sure.
But a lot of it is the prep. The homework has to be done at the shop, not trying to figure out things at the track.
I always like to ask that question of people who are doing it kind of for a living, for those of us who aren't, so that we can kind of figure out, okay, what are we doing or what can we do in our prep that can help us out a little bit, because some people, I like to tinker on my cars. When I was racing, I like to build my own cars. I like to do all the work on the weekends. But I always wondered, okay, what are the guys who are doing this professionally? What are they doing between race weekends that I'm not doing? So that's kind of like that's why I throw out a question like that. So
it's creating a list. I mean, our prep list has multiple items that we're checking over, retorquing, inspecting, and also. And this comes from a little bit of a super brief stint I had in NHRA in my high school years, working with the top field team. A lot of road racers don't time out components.
Right.
Whereas the drag racing community, especially at the super upper tier end of the field, I learned and saw firsthand timing out components. How many runs runs down the strip a component would make. Even though if it was good, it got tossed or sold down to a lower tier team or rebuilt. For us, for example, like on spec Miatas, it's not exactly a speed secret. It's a reliability and a safety issue.
Right.
Ball joints, front ball joints, 8 to 12 weekends, and or any kind of hit, you take them off, you throw them away. We've been at events where we've seen when they fail 3 times. Twice was in good spots where there was plenty of runoff area, and one place, unfortunately, was in a very bad area.
Right.
So it's learning to you don't want to fix the car. You don't want to wait for something to break. You want to be super, super proactive.
Right. Yeah, I learned that. I spent a little time with an former IndyCar engineer. And that was one of the things, he asked me when he was looking at my little Honda CRX. He goes, how long have those How long have those brake rotors been in the car? I'm like, I don't know. I put them in and started last year. How many laps are on them? I don't know. He goes, well, you should know. You should try to keep track to a certain extent. And because and then when it fails, hopefully you'll swap it out before it fails, and you can get that number. But if it does fail, you'll know to back it off a few hundred miles or a few 25 laps or whatever sooner. So that's a great tip for everybody on that. So let's talk a little bit about going to Mid-Ohio this coming up weekend. I know you've been there at least a couple times because I've seen you did a couple of runoffs there back in the day in an Acura. I don't know how much you've been there recently. I'm guessing being in the Pennsylvania area, you get to Mid-Ohio fairly frequently.
We do, and it's definitely a favorite place of ours. Super excited about getting there. The ownership has finally invested in repaving the place.
Right.
It was the Mid-Ohio has a lot of things going for it. It's in a good spot geographically if you think about the general population of the nation.
Right.
It has a very good layout. It's challenging. There's elevation changes. It for certain categories it can be a difficult track to pass on. But it's a lot of spectating options, has a lot of history there. So, being that they've repaved it, we're really excited to get back. We've heard good things so far, how the repave has gone. So we'll see how it all shakes out. But, the entries look pretty strong so far in a number of categories. I know Spec Miata numbers are very good. Spec MX-5 numbers are very good. They're getting their own, I believe their Spec MX-5 is also getting their own run group. So yeah, definitely looking forward to it. We'll be there, before we know it.
So I take it from what you've said, you have not had cars there on the new pavement yet, right?
I haven't driven it personally.
Okay. So that brings me to my next question. When you've got so many miles on a track prior to a repave, what is your approach when you come into this coming weekend to kind of figure out what that pavement means as far as tires go and setups and just figuring it out on your end? What's your approach to that?
Leading up to this, we have had other people that we know drive on it in other category cars, other sanctioning bodies, reviewing video and data already from those cars. And people are going to find out this very, very quickly. For example, turn 1 going underneath the bridge was repaved last year.
Right.
That section has not been repaved again.
Okay.
So, that is a little bit older. There are patches already at the apex point going underneath the bridge.
Mm-hmm.
It seemed to be quite smooth in the cars that we were reviewing. How do you approach it? Reach out to these teams, understand what kind of cars they are, the weights, what kind of tires they were using, what were their pressures. I mean, without any of that information, you are kind of going in blind.
Right.
You kind of almost need to be ready for anything. For example, how new or old tires? Are new tires going to be better? Do you need tires that are scuffed a little bit? How much do the tires heat up? Where the cold pressure is going to be starting at. It's still going to be new for the majority of us going there.
Right.
So you still need to approach it with an open mind and be ready to make some significant setup changes to make the car work.
Yeah. The good news is I don't think they've changed the actual configuration at all. I think it's the same configuration. They didn't widen any part of the track or anything like that. So
track is the same. The curbing appears to be old, so it has not been widened at all.
Right.
If anything, coming out of the carousel onto the front straightaway, there was as you're making that right and then the quick left, there was a hop, if you will, that some people didn't like. Some people felt it helped turn the car. That appears to be completely gone. So we'll see how that shakes up for the different categories going there. But yeah, same layout. It's not any wider. but the pavement is super fresh.
Right. Right.
And
Just
hopefully it doesn't rain, but I'm sure it'll be better than how it was in the rain at Mid Ohio, which was quite diabolical.
yeah, I mean it was awfully slippery in the wet prior to that, especially in the last maybe 5 or 6 years from everyone I've talked to. Just got worse and worse and worse. So, you've switched now to T4, or you're racing a lot of T4 in the Super Tours. I'm assuming, or maybe I shouldn't assume. Is this an effort to go to the runoffs in T4 this year again?
The plan is to go to the runoffs in T4. Skipped last year, took a break from the runoffs, but no, we have every intention of going to Road America this year in T4.
So you spent a lot of time in Spec Miatas over the years. Why the switch, or what intrigues you about T4?
It's something different. It allows me to get into a newer chassis. We need to get a little bit more familiar with it. We started getting uh, more NCs in the shop, both track day and street cars, and finally took the plunge a few years ago and looked at different categories and felt, all right, let's try this out. Let's see if we can make it a go. Other people are already running MX5s in T4. Let's do our own. And yeah, we've been very happy with it.
How much of that is R&D for you to be able to share with customers when they come and start to ask questions? You can give them firsthand experience.
So any other NC customer, I mean, it's very good. It's not guesswork.
Right.
If they come in and they want to change to the car, they want a certain alignment. They're asking about shocks, springs, sway bars for their own application. Even though they may not be racing, you have just firsthand knowledge of this is really what you need to do on the car, and this is why. This is what's going to work. This is what's going to make it perform better. This is what's going to make the car more durable.
And is that a lot of do you get a lot of track day guys who are maybe have no intention to go wheel to wheel? Is that a big part of what you do?
It's still a big mix.
Yeah.
Yeah, we do have track day people. We have, for example, within the last week, we've had, an ND car with an Edelbrock supercharger. We've had an NB with a massive Garrett turbocharger running on E85 that was trying to rip itself off the dyno, and everything else in between.
Mm-hmm.
But track day people, yeah, it seems to be steady. There's still more road racers than track day customers that we deal with currently, but it's a definite segment that's out there.
Mr. Collins is filling up my chat with questions.
Good.
Why on a T4 MX5 do you drive off the front tires way off before the rears? Yeah, that's what he had to clarify. There was a typo. Why do the front tires come off so much faster on the T4 MX5 car than the rears?
In my opinion, it's the balance. If you look at the car on the scales, at least mine. I mean, obviously, I'm not going to go into individual wheel weights.
Sure.
That on my car, but, it's nose heavy. It just is. T4, the car has to weigh 2,700 pounds. It's a bit too heavy. I weigh 150 pounds. I have literally at least 250 pounds bolted next to me for ballast. I have to run the cool suit full with water, even if it's 40 degrees outside, to make weight. I have to finish with well over 2 gallons in the tank to make weight.
Yeah.
The car's heavy.
Boy, I wish I had your problems.
That's it's a little bit of a BOP gripe. And it's beyond just the MX5. I think it would be nice if the club can kind of sit back and reevaluate and look at some of the categories, like for example T4 or even all of the touring cars, and do they actually need to be that heavy? if the cars can all make that weight easily, can we start taking weight off? It's going to save people money on brakes, tires, wear and tear. But getting back to Mike's question, it's nose heavy. It just is.
Yeah, yeah. In T4, are all of the cars carrying ballast to make weight for the most part?
I know the RX-8 has to carry ballast. The BRZ and Toyota 86 platform has to carry weight. All the MX-5s that I know of have to have weight. I'm trying to think about some of the front drive cars that are out there. Majority of the big bodied like Acuras and Accords and stuff, they're over 3,000 pounds. I would imagine they have to have ballast weight. So I think the majority of people, they probably at least have at minimum 75 to 100 pounds bolted somewhere.
Yeah.
To make weight.
If everyone's carrying some weight, it'd be interesting to see if they were to take the car with the least amount of weight, get rid of their weight, and then take however many pounds that is off of everybody, and that would solve your concerns about saving brakes and all that kind of stuff. So that would be one way to get into it. So Mike says he's 6'4", 275, and he still has to run 100 pounds of ballast. You know what? Maybe I could drive a T4 car and be pretty close on weight. That would be cool. As jokes aside, you and I, while you have the girth of a race car driver, we both have the height of a Formula car driver. I remember walking past the podium at Hallett, thinking to myself that if I won the race, I'd still be the shortest guy on the podium if I were on the top step. And then I saw a picture of you on the podium. and the second and third place cars, I think they took a knee. Is that what happened?
They were joking around. Yeah. It is a running joke. I am vertically challenged.
Me too.
Many times, being fortunate enough to win and second and third place, people are still towering over me. So no, it was a real lighthearted moment.
Yeah.
It was all in good fun. There's times where I think there's even some pictures on social media where a good friend of mine, Rob Hines, who's a T3 driver and a Spec Miata driver, we've known him for years. He's very tall.
Yeah.
There's times where I've whipped out a milk crate when he wants to talk, so I could actually look at him.
Rob's a friend of mine. I saw a picture on your Facebook. You were standing on a tire wheel,
that's it. Yep.
and you. I think he was still taller than you, but not by much. Not by much. For those who don't know, the podium at Hallett is there's only one step, and it's about 3 inches off the ground, and then second and third place just stand on the ground, and I was just like that's a pathetic podium. Nice backdrop, but the podium is not very big. So.
Yeah, still an awesome track. If anybody's able to get out to Oklahoma, you really need to. It's a unique place. It's a really good time. Definitely plan on getting back there next year.
I had not been to Hallett before last year, and when Greg and I split up the assignments for going to the races last year, he had a conflict with Hallett, and he couldn't go because he had to do a Mars race. And I was like, oh, okay, I'll go to Oklahoma. And it didn't, Oklahoma, it's not really a place I would have thought I'd go and have a good time at. But I got there, and I have absolutely fallen in love. The people there are awesome. The track is awesome. Great concession stand people, friendly as can be. But that racetrack is just a hoot, isn't it?
It is. It's busy.
Yeah.
It's very, very busy. Yeah, it's definitely a hoot. I mean, last year, my first test session, when I left pit lane, going through the first couple corners, I thought to myself, how on earth are we actually going to race on this place?
Mm-hmm. They had one, and were you there last year, or was this your first year?
Last year was my first year.
Okay, so before last year, the uphill right-hander, the blind uphill right-hander. There used to be like a billboard or a water tower or something that was a reference point that everybody used to aim at. And apparently before last year they took it down and nobody knew where to put their cars. It was very, because it's just a blind uphill right-hander and very, very cool. Dan Lohan mentioned here, and I don't know that we plan on talking about this either, but hey, it's coming from the chat. Are you helping out with the new Club Spec NC program at all? I understand you're maybe helping out with some of the guys doing that.
I know Steve and the rest of the staff in the shop. We've had two different NCs that have come through for club spec parts being put on, which is a real interesting concept. It kind of goes back to, if you think years ago, how I got into SCCA, where went out, bought a car, started autocrossing, got more involved, and got into hill climbing and road racing, where this path of club spec, someone can theoretically take a street car, start modifying it, putting the right pieces on it from the get-go, and as they get more and more involved and more serious, then the majority of the platform and the hard work is done and it's in place.
Yeah, it's a lot of interest. It seems like there's been more interest on the Mustang side of the Club Spec program, and I think that might be just people are like, okay, another Mazda to do. Let's try something a little different. But I don't imagine it's going to be long for the Mazda side of the program to kind of take off as well. But just another way to get people. And I like the cross-platform idea of the cross-program idea of the Club Spec program, with the idea that one car will be able to be used in time trials and solo on an equal basis, kind of like the specs.
Exactly, because again, going back when autocrossing, you could build a car, at least when I started off, where cars were they would run like a street prepared category, and the rule set of what you were allowed to do on that car, if you took a street prepared car, it would not directly cross over into improved touring.
Right.
You'd have to change a bunch of stuff. So you'd have people that are, doing double work, taking components off that they already spent money on.
Right.
So this is a very, very, very interesting concept. I know it's in its, the beginning stages, its infancy, but I think SCCA is definitely on the right path with it.
If you're watching, hit the like button as many times as you possibly can. Subscribe to the channel, and hit that little bell button when you subscribe, so you get alerted every time we go live to do a show. That would be awesome. Also want to take a second, Mark, real quick, and thank the people who helped me put the show on. Racekeeper is the official in-car camera of Inside the SCCA. We had it on our car at Solo Nationals last year, and we will have it out there again this year if all goes well. Ray Esports is the official sim racing league of Inside the SCCA. Stevie Ray does a great job with that, and it's run more like actual racing, where the people involved are mostly SCCAers, and they really try to race respectfully without doing the typical iRacing, just move people out of the way so you can get to the front. So a little more respectful sim race driving there. That's why I like the Ray Esports sim leagues on Tuesday nights and on the weekends. And then, of course, Solo Performance Specialties. They're out there at most of the Solo National Tours and also at Solo Nationals. Dave and his crew are great folks, and we appreciate all of them being on board. You can see their logos up above me here. I guess it would be up above me there, that way. All of their information in the show notes. Click on their links and click and watch their podcasts as well. And it would be great for you to go and spend a little money with them as well, because they're helping me keep the podcast going. So, all right, so what's left on your schedule this year, Mark? We're getting kind of towards the end of the Super Tour season, but I know up in your neck of the woods, as far as out here on the West Coast, we're ending the first half of our season. You guys are just getting ramped up basically out there in the Northeast, right?
In terms of Super Tours, I mean, it would be nice if the Super Tour season would go a little bit longer than ending in June. Just a thought to SCCA National, if they could figure out a way we could at least get it to July, if you will. But what we have coming up is Mid-Ohio next weekend. After that is an off weekend. Back at it for Watkins Glen Super Tour. Following weekend, off weekend for us racing. We're going to actually do some spectating for the Formula One race up in Montreal.
Nice.
Super excited about that. We come back. There is a regional in the middle of June at Lime Rock Park. It's the only SCCA event at Lime Rock Park. I think they call it the pub crawl. It's around the 12th, 13th. So if you're in the New England region, the Northeast region of the country, and you want to get up to Lime Rock, consider the event. will be there. Then right after is the June sprints out at Road America. Um, right afterwards, uh, back at the Glen for a regional. Believe there's a week or two off, and then we have a majors at Jersey. At that point, we're already in the middle of July.
Yeah.
So it's again on average 2 to 3 weekends a month.
Yeah.
It would just keeps on going and going and going.
It makes me sad. When I was the flag chief at Lime Rock for New York region, there were three or four SCCA events at Lime Rock every year. Now, back then, early 2000s, there weren't the options that you guys have now. There was no Thompson. What's the other one that it's in Connecticut or?
So, with Lime Rock, there's unfortunately a bunch of things happened. When I started road racing, for us, we had Lime Rock, the Glen, Pocono, Summit.
Right.
And what's happened is now there's Thompson is back on board. Palmer.
That's Palmer. Yep. New
Um,
Jersey.
New Jersey Motorsports Park really took a beat. It did a beating on both Lime Rock and Pocono.
Pit race.
There's pit race complex, so people have a lot more choices. And then also with Lime Rock, the place hasn't gone any cheaper.
Right.
So, New England region has done something interesting. They've, consolidated. They make it one event. So, the demand is high. The supply is low, if you will.
Right.
If you want to race there. I think they do a really good job. Lime Rock still has its unique aspect where you run on Friday and Saturday. There's nothing that goes on there Sunday. So that's a little bit of a hurdle for people to get an extra day off from work to run there.
I think it helps, though, by only doing it once a year, because now you're only having to do that once a year. And it becomes more of a special, unique event. It's kind of like a treat to go and run at Lime Rock now. And if it costs a lot more to rent it than it used to, and you're doing it once a year, hopefully you'll have pretty good car numbers and you can offset that cost. So,
exactly.
Yeah, it's tough when you're in the know on how much it costs to run some of these things. We're lucky out here. A Cal Club basically owns Buttonwillow, so it's that helps offset the costs of doing all of the race weekends that we do out here. Not all regions have that option, that luxury. So, what is, I always ask these questions of folks who've been in it for a long time, who've been part of the club for a long time. We have had so much change in the last 20 years with classes, and now we've got the internet involved and being able to source parts and cars and information. Social media is here, which we never had before. We're actually now live streaming Super Tours. That was never a thing. What have you seen in the last 20 years that the club has been through in its metamorphosis that you like, and what has happened over the last 20 years that you don't like?
There's a lot. That's we don't have enough time tonight on that.
Let's narrow it down to 2 likes and 2 dislikes.
One of the things I like with SCCA is it still produces some of the best amateur road racing.
Right.
I've dabbled with other sanctioning bodies, other categories, if you will, and those other groups do things differently. There are some things they do better than SCCA. There's other things that they do much worse than SCCA. SCCA is still consistent. It's still, still the juggernaut in the U.S. But at least the club itself and the higher ups in Topeka understand what you're saying. Things are changing. We can't be operating like we did, 5, 10, 15 years ago.
Right.
They understand that there's some hurdles that they have to deal with. The other thing I like is, at least at the majority of events I'm going to, from, on the officiating side, they're a little bit more open to hearing what drivers have to say. And it's a two-way street with without the officials, without the volunteers, the drivers and the prep shop owners, we all get it. We know the event can't go on.
Right.
But on the flip side, you know, a friend of mine said, we racers, we're the clowns who pay for our own circus.
Mm-hmm.
We're the ones fronting the bill. So,
right.
There's the give and take. And that's something else that I like, where the club is being a little bit more open and realizing that even though technically it's a club, technically it's not for profit, they understand that they need to keep the members and the drivers, happy. Things I don't like. There's still some rigidity in the organizational aspect in some of the officiating. I think the club is still struggling to attract. The club is doing a good job attracting newer, younger drivers. It's still struggling to get flaggers, and they know it. They're struggling to get officials. We need to figure out a way to entice people that, love cars, love motorsports. Maybe they are not in a position where they can drive or want to drive, but they want to be involved. We need to figure that out sooner than later.
Yeah.
Because the writing's on the wall a little bit.
Yeah.
And then the biggest thing that I don't like, and I'm sure there's many out there, it's the costs.
Yeah.
Everything's going up, and there's a lot of things the club SCCA can't control, but it's the things that they can control that I wish they would really have an open eye to. How can we maximize the track time for the drivers for the least amount of money, while the event is still profitable, so the host region can do the event, the next year.
Right.
And I'm just going to say right now, without mentioning certain tracks, there's some tracks that SCCA and the host regions need to make some very hard decisions. And if it's not feasible, you need to find somewhere else to go.
Yeah.
If you're losing, in New England region is you learn this, very quickly. You can't have 3-4 events at Lime Rock and not make a buck. If you can consolidate it down to one event and you can still make it a go, well, then that's what it is.
Right. Right.
If you're going to some tracks where the management and the cost and there's a lot of, hurdles that just really aren't making it a good time for people, well, maybe there's some other tracks that we really need to concentrate on.
Yeah.
So there's going to be some tough decisions.
There always are. There always are. One of the things I think is a big part of when you talked about the things that you liked and some of the changes that have been coming over the last several years, back in the day, there was no other game in town. If you wanted to go amateur road racing, you went to the SCCA. There might have been some small little regional clubs. There was Midwest Council in the Midwest. There may have been some local. Waterford Hills has their own little race series. But the only place to really go was the SCCA. And now there's lots of places to go drive your car. Maybe some wheel-to-wheel, some not. And the club, I think, was slow to realize that they had to start listening more to the drivers, to the customers. And now that's happening more so, and I think you're right in your assessment of that. And it's just so hard with the cost of things. I don't know what the solution is. I always thought, gosh, except you're paying for a track for 2 weekends. If you could split our races up over 2 weekends and give half the run groups one weekend, half the run groups the second weekend, you give them more track time. But how do you pay for that? Because track time is always every complaint I hear. Not every. The vast majority of complaints that I hear, when I hear complaints, is we don't have enough track time. We don't have enough track time. We're spending a lot of money not getting enough track time. That's a hard nut to crack.
In terms of maybe as a driver, I don't I don't know what's all involved in organizing an event.
Right.
How, for example, Mid-Ohio, how early did the host region have to start, working on the contract to rent the facility? Who's involved in the actual rental contract? Who's negotiating the rates, if at all you're able to? Is this done by a single person? Is it done by committee? How much is national office involved since it's actually a super tour event or not? Um, I that's something I think some drivers would like to hear a little bit more about, of just how this all comes to be. But getting back to there's I think there's just some other places we can go
Yeah.
instead of banging our head against the wall at tracks that just aren't feasible.
Right.
Regardless whether they're uh, quote unquote bucket list
Right.
tracks. We just we again, getting back to, we have to figure this out sooner than later.
Right. Right. So on that, I guess I have a podcast I need to do. I need to get some race chairs and race organizers on and have that discussion and maybe unlock some of those chapters for people to learn to. But I've also always heard from from every region I've been involved in, and I've been involved in, I think I'm in my 9th or 10th region now. All of the regions would love to have drivers on their board of directors, would love to have drivers involved. So I put the challenge out to the drivers. I know we're all busy and we have lives and stuff, but even if you show up to sit in on a board meeting, maybe not become a board member, if you ask those questions, I don't know many regions that wouldn't, provide the answers. So I think there's lots of different.
Yeah, if I could interject.
Sure, absolutely.
The first time I attended a mini con. So the Northeast Division mini con was a couple months ago, and sitting on some meetings, and the president of SCCA was there and gave a nice speech, and we were going over some statistics and numbers and all that. And what I'm getting at is, I was looking at the itinerary of some of the meetings or seminars that you could attend. And as a driver and as a prep shop owner, one of the things that kind of took me back was there was one for stewards. And it was marked pretty dark in parentheses, something to the effect, I'm paraphrasing, stewards only private. I would have loved to have sat in on that. And just to kind of get a take of, who knows, maybe when I'm up in my age and I'm not able to drive anymore, but I still want to be involved and kind of see what it's all about. Or who knows, if I was there with somebody else that wanted to get involved in the steward program. Well, what do you mean it's private?
Yeah.
That's the secret part of the club. And I'm sure I'll get some calls and messages tomorrow, but that rubbed me the wrong way.
Sure.
Yeah.
So
if you want newer, younger people to flag, to officiate, to volunteer, to go through the steward training program, it needs to be an open door.
Yep. So I don't know how often you've had a chance to watch the show, but I work closely with the club, but I am not paid by the club to do this on purpose, because I want to be able to have these conversations, and sometimes they're not the easiest conversations, but I always try to keep the conversations in a constructive manner. So these are important things to bring up, Mark. So if you do get pushback, I hope it's, hey, Mark, let's have a discussion.
And I'm saying it the way I'm saying, so I do get somewhat of a response.
Right.
And it's it's not all doom and gloom. The club has so many things in place where it can continue on growing and improving. We just have to be a little bit more open-minded.
Yep. Well, I do know that the folks at National watch, and they have been, I think, more open and receptive to ideas over the last 5 or 10 years than they've been in a long, long time. So things, unfortunately, don't always change quickly in our club. But I think there's more thought process into listening than there ever has been. So hopefully you'll get a positive phone call. But
I'll let you know.
Yeah, absolutely. Anything else? Do you have some folks you want to thank before we let you go? I know, thanking the people that help us get there is an important part of the sport.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, the people that support us that do this crazy thing called racing. I mean, I'm very fortunate. I mean, my wife is a fellow racer, fellow Spec Miata racer. I actually met her autocrossing at SCCA many years ago. The whole gang at Planet Miata, Steve, Melissa, Dan, Nick, Brandon, Rico, Mike, Mitchie, everybody that's full-time independent contractors, our customers that race with us, whether you're racing with us, buying parts, having your cars worked on, and of course my parents who helped support me at the beginning stages. There's countless other people. I'm sure I'm forgetting, but you know who you are, and you mean the world to me.
Definitely. I want to shout out to your wife because she's always in our chat for the Super Tour races and providing some entertainment value, but also awesome information about all of the drivers and the teams that you guys are close to. And it's always fun to have people in the know in the chat. So I think she's in there. Even when she's at the racetrack, she's in the chat, which is triply cool because that's kind of our eyes and ears in the paddock. So big shout out to her. And she was one of my associate producers of the weekend winners from an earlier race. So I'll bring something to Mid-Ohio, the little swag that we hand out for that. So
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Mark, thanks a lot. I appreciate it. And I will try to hunt you down at Mid-Ohio and shake your hand. How's that?
Perfect. I'll see you in a couple days.
All right, that's going to do it for another episode of Inside the SCCA. If you like what you're hearing, subscribe to the RacingWire Podcast Network and the Racing Network on YouTube so you won't miss any episodes. It would also be great if you leave a comment, especially if it's a good one. You can follow us on social media to find out who our next guest is. That's on RacingWire Net on Twitter. There's a new episode of Inside the SCCA every week. I'm Brian Bielanski. Have yourself a fantastic weekend and go play with cars.
I'm Dorsey Schrader, and when I'm on my way to a race, I'll listen to the SCCA podcast, Inside the Short Bus.
Inside the SCCA is a presentation of the RacingWire Podcast Network and Rule 15 Productions. This podcast is not affiliated with, endorsed, or sponsored by the Sports Car Club of America. The views expressed within are those of the host and our guests, and not that of the